Khamzat Chimaev versus Nate Diaz takes place this Saturday in the main event of UFC 279. Chimaev is streaking to the top right now, and he fights Nate Diaz. Spotty results in the past few, but you look at the competition level, can't really hate it. As far as the fights for Nate, you look at the last one, Leon Edwards. He hurt Leon late in that fight and nearly knocked him out. Leon Edwards goes on to beat Kamaru Usman by knockout. But let's be fair. Nate Diaz lost the vast majority of that fight in dominant fashion. Leon Edwards had him on the ground, was beating him up. Leon Edwards was out striking him. Nate Diaz couldn't do much to Leon. Yes, he hurt him really, really late in the fight. And I know Nate kind of says, hey, listen, I won that fight. I beat him in the real fight. There's a lot of bad things from that fight that a guy like Khamzat Chimaev takes and say, oh, I can take advantage seriously in these spots, because Chimaev, a better wrestler than Leon Edwards. Striking-wise, Edwards is top class, and him and Chimaev would be interesting in the stand-up, but definitely some concerns for Nate Diaz coming in with this Khamzat fight, especially with that Leon matchup. You look before that, he loses to George Masvidal, Jorge Gamebred, in the BMF fight, which was no BMF at all because they stopped it with a cut. I don't really take that as a serious loss for Nate Diaz. I'll be honest, as I looked at that fight, yes, Masvidal was dominating early. Nate was starting to find a little bit of success, and then we're talking the BMF, and they stop it for a cut. Makes absolutely zero sense to me. They shouldn't even gave that belt to Masvidal. That fight needed to be ran without no cut stoppage, because I'll be fair and straight up, I think that Masvidal was starting to get touched, and as we hit 4 and 5, I think Nate would have turned it on. Not saying Nate would have definitely won the fight, but I think there was a lot more to find out about that matchup than we got to see. So forgivable loss there. I mean, you look at the last two fights for Nate Diaz. Yes, both losses, but forgivable losses. Masvidal cut stoppage, and that was now in 2019. That's a while ago. The Edwards fight, he succeeded at the very end, and now Edwards is the world champ. So you have a loss to the number one guy in the weight class. Before that, the win is against Anthony Pettis in 2019. He dominated that fight, but a win over Anthony Pettis doesn't signify much. Granted, at that point, that was a decent Anthony Pettis. Now, Pettis is losing over in PFL consistently. So the last win for Nate Diaz is not all that top line. And then before that, it was 2016 with Conor McGregor. He lost a majority decision. And then before that, he beat Conor McGregor. Since 2016, what do we got? 5 fights for Nate Diaz? Because he had that long layoff. 3 years off from 2016 to 2019. He's now fighting, a little more consistently. 2019, twice. 2021, once. And now we get him in 2022 versus Khamzat Chimaev in the last fight on the contract, which is kind of scary if you're a fan of Nate Diaz, as most of us are. This could be the final walk in the UFC for Nate, and they're giving him probably the hardest matchup possible. With Khamzat Chimaev, you have the guy. He's 11-0. It seems like he's the next big thing. Burst onto the UFC scene, and I said, yes, I see this guy as title challenger for sure, but I kind of see him as championship material. Destroys John Phillips. Destroys Rise McKee. One-punch knockouts Gerald Mearshart. Destroys the Leech. In the meantime, grapples Jack Hermanson, actually wrestled him, and he beats him in wrestling. I think that's a decent little win to have. And then he fights Gilbert Burns, and where are the holes? I think mentally a bit. Khamzat Chimaev hadn't fought in front of a crowd before in the UFC. And when he had that pay-per-view crowd, he went crazy on Gilbert Burns. Khamzat went crazy. He let the hands fly. He looked for the knockout. You can't necessarily look to knock out all these guys, especially a top guy in the world like Gilbert Burns. He got dropped in that fight. He got tested and taken all the way to the limit, and he wins a 29-28 unanimous decision, and people felt that it was really close. I know a few people would say he lost. Personally, he won that fight, for sure to me. He won that fight without a doubt, but it was an extremely hard matchup where Chimaev was tested, but what we learned from that fight is he's battle tested now. He can take damage too. He can keep on coming forward. There's no quit in Khamzat Chimaev. We will say this. The gas tank looked pretty good, but I wonder how that fight would have looked if we would have had 2 more rounds. That's a 3-round matchup. This is a 5-round main event. Nate Diaz does not offer the same striking or grappling threat as Gilbert Burns, but what he has is incredible durability, like to another level. Incredible gas tank, top of the line. And he's Nate Diaz. He gets in your head with little smack talk. I think Chimaev will probably attack him a bit with the striking, and I do think he can land some shots standing up. I feel like his kickboxing is pretty solid. Diaz is not super quick with the stand-up, but he does have that pretty decent snapping straight that he landed on Conor McGregor. I don't think he'll do a ton of damage on the feet to Chimaev. I think Khamzat will shoot fairly early into the fight, and I think he'll get on top and beat Nate Diaz up a bit. The biggest thing I see as a factor here is the scar tissue for Nate Diaz. As Chimaev is landing punches on him, especially if he decides to go with these shots, Chimaev might cut Nate Diaz quick into this fight. The first 2 minutes, if there's some shots landing, Nate's going to bleed. As the blood is pouring down, as Chimaev is on top, let's say Khamzat Chimaev is in the half guard and he's throwing ground and pound. Let's say he's even in side control. Nate's fighting it a bit. He's not getting hit with huge shots, but there's still punches landed. Elbows maybe too. The referee is going to be looking closely, and when they see a ton of blood pouring down, more apt to stop the fight. Another concern, let's say the cuts open up. Let's say Chimaev goes with an intelligent game plan. I would say get on top and elbow Nate Diaz. Let's open these cuts. The doctor might stop the fight. There's a real possibility Nate Diaz is stopped by the doctor. My official pick will be Khamzat Chimaev KO TKO. I think he may do it with the ground and pound, but I don't necessarily think he's going to be blasting Nate Diaz's face away and like Nate is out on the ground. It's more the blood is going to be everywhere. Diaz is going to be getting beaten up, and the ref feels he needs to stop it. I think Nate Diaz will actually be okay, and if we weren't looking at stopping fights with like being out cold, like if Nate was allowed to go until he is completely unconscious, we might be looking at 5 rounds here. Where would I fear for Khamzat? Round 3, 4, and 5. If Nate Diaz weathers an early storm from Khamzat Chimaev, let's say Nate Diaz gets the shit kicked out of him in round 1. Let's say he gets the shit kicked out of him in round 2. Now Chimaev's a little tired. Fuck, why can't I beat Nate? Why is Nate still here? Why is Nate still up? How is he coming out for these rounds? Nate's going to take the damage. Let's say he keeps on fighting. Nate's still in the fight. Chimaev's getting gassed. They start striking. Now things even out a bit. Maybe Chimaev lands a clean straight. Nate lands a clean straight on Chimaev. Gets Chimaev's legs a little loose, a little wobbly. Nate's still in the matchup. Somehow finds his way in a dominant position on the mat. If he can get Khamzat Chimaev's back, he can win the fight. The one method of victory for me that I have for Nate Diaz is win by rear naked choke. It's not impossible. I know Nate Diaz is being counted out as if he can't fight, but this dude is a fucking OG mixed martial artist, the true fighter's fighter, gangster in the cage. Khamzat Chimaev's the new gangster. Diaz is the OG. He's been in there with everyone. Don't count the man out. Yes, Chimaev should win, but he needs to fight intelligently. He needs to control the pace. He needs to control the gas tank. If he goes crazy, looks for the knockout, and let's be real, Conor McGregor tried to knock out Nate Diaz. It didn't work out for him. He got choked out in that first one. He barely won the rematch. Jorge Masvidal tried to knock out Nate Diaz. He was starting to gas a bit when the doctor stopped the fight. Leon Edwards was reserved and dominated Nate Diaz for 5 rounds. Leon's shown he can be extremely reserved and win fights over the course of long 5, right? Chimaev is a killer. He's crushing everybody early, and he has a 3-round fight with Burns, which is hard to look at because there was moments where he made serious mistakes. I'm picking Chimaev to win by KO TKO. But betting-wise, you're not going to be throwing down on Chimaev money line. There's absolutely no reason for that. Khamzat Chimaev, at best value, is minus 960. Around minus 1,000 or more. At Bet Online, he's minus 1,800. Nate Diaz is upwards of a plus 900 dog. I think it would make sense to bet Nate Diaz as a dog, even if it's just a light bet. For the opportunity, for the huge plus money, it's never impossible for a fighter to win, especially of Nate Diaz's caliber. Yes, Chimaev should win, but I don't suggest you throw $1,000 down to make $100. You look at any of the other bets here, I think Chimaev to win by KO TKO, minus 150. It's an understandable play, but it's not a great line. I don't think Chimaev would submit Nate Diaz. Let's see Diaz by sub. Nate Diaz by submission. Upwards of plus 1,900. If you're looking for Hail Marys if you're looking for value over everything and you want to take a chance, I think lightly touching the Nate Diaz money line could be fun, and it's not impossible. Lightly touching Nate Diaz by submission could be fun, and it's not impossible. But if you're looking for the realistic best likelihood outcome bet, it's Chimaev money line, but it's minus 1,000. Chimaev KO TKO is also a decent option at minus 150. Khamzat Chimaev should most definitely win this fight. I do believe he's going to, but I'm just bringing up some facts that you can't count out Nate Diaz. You can never count out a Diaz brother. What a fight. What a main event. I am more excited for this fight, I think, than any card so far in 2022. I'm stoked for this matchup. You guys know I'm a huge Khamzat Chimaev fan. I'm also a huge Nate Diaz fan. I have a hard time picking who I'd want to win in this matchup. I'll give you the prediction, Khamzat Chimaev, but I love both of these fighters. And there's huge matchups to make for either with victories. I want to see Diaz versus McGregor 3. I want to see Khamzat Chimaev versus Leon Edwards or Kamaru Usman. I'd actually like to see Khamzat Chimaev fight Masvidal as well. Tons of matchups in the welterweight division. It's stacked. This is an incredible fight. Sweet main event for UFC 279. Cannot wait for it. I hope you guys enjoyed the individual breakdown. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. If you don't have anything to say, but you just enjoy the content, drop a W in the chat as always. Make sure to like and subscribe. Turn those post notifications on. And if you really enjoy, share the video as well. Much love, my people. Thank you all so much. And I will see you all in the next one. Peace, everybody.